All right. So spent this morning, I went on your blog. Uh, I listened to one of your sermons, Thou Shall Not Follow the Multitude. It was excellent. Uh,
Thank you.
I wish you could share that with some of the priests in my diocese here in Western Mass. I also um, I listened to Foggy Dew, which you played on St. Patrick's Day. I thought it was great. Um,
Thank you very much.
I like that you pointed out that it's a sad song. All this month, I've been playing. I have a piano at my house. I play a little piano. I've been playing Molly Malone, and I have like this little like beginner version of Molly Malone, and I played it over and over again. And then just recently, I heard Molly Malone sung in its entirety, and I didn't realize that she dies at the end. You
Of course
point
she
out,
does.
yeah, right. You point out that it's actually a sad song, and yeah, unfortunately, the Irish like to put in tragedy in their music. Um, so, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do as a pastor and as a composer?
Sure. Well, I started off as a musician, and when I joined the Community Baptist Church of Gayhead in Aquina, Massachusetts, on Martha's Vineyard, I was leading worship while Pastor Leo D. Christian was the reverend there, and he kind of took me under his wing. He knew that I had an interest in ministry, and he let me go up on the pulpit and preach sometimes, so I got to get a little practice in there. And all of my academic background comes from cheap opportunities for education, shall we say. So when I lived in New York City, I lived above a Chabad, and because I was ethnically Jewish, I went in and I learned Hebrew and studied Torah and got a little bit of Hebrew under my belt. And at the same time, my friend J.P. Ross was a student at New York Theological Seminary. And so he'd take me to classes, and I got all the books on the reading list. And that's kind of how I had a parallel seminary experience without having to pay for it, which is good because I could not afford that. I already went to music school, and I had no plans on going back to school ever again. And those were my academic pursuits that led me to, have some of the credentials I needed to at least preach from the Bible, dare I say, intelligently, coherently.
Now, in your sermon, I thought you were using Latin. Were you using Hebrew?
It depends on the sermon. Sometimes I'll refer to the Latin or to the Greek in the New Testament, because the New Testament is originally written in Greek.
Oh, okay, all right. So you'll go. Have you also studied Latin as well?
I can't speak Latin. I just know enough biblical Latin words and phrases. As you get deep in the scriptures and in the church fathers, you inevitably run into Latin, and you run into translation issues. And in the footnotes, they're always going to explain to you this Latin phrase could also mean this, this, and this, and it really has a bearing on interpretation. So you can't avoid it when you're really doing study. And anyone who does Bible study, I recommend you get a concordance, and that'll show you, side by side what words you're reading in the Bible, and the Greek and the Latin, and when applicable, also the Hebrew. And it's a very, very valuable tool to have, and you'll start realizing that the word choice in the Bible is very specific, and the authors were very intentional about it.
Yeah, as I'm Catholic, and the subject of the use of Latin comes up a lot, especially among younger, more conservative Catholics. They want to bring in more of the ancient language into worship, and sort of the baby boomer people who are leading the church seem to be opposed to it. So we have our own. I know as a Baptist, you're probably more versed in the Bible than the average Catholic is, and I think the ancient languages are probably more crucial in that respect. As for us, it's more like should we worship in this language, which has been done for, the vast amount of time that Catholicism has been around, or should we use the vernacular, which has been going on since 1960? So can you talk a little bit about the music? Now, you're the pastor and you also play the music during the service?
Oh, it's a very, very small church. Yeah, we have about 5 to 15 people in the off season, Martha's Vineyard, and in the summer, a lot of our visitors are just visitors to the island. So we all carry our own weight. And yeah, I do the music ministry on top of preaching, and that simply means I'm behind the pulpit with my acoustic guitar. We don't have amplification. It's a small historic chapel. It's not the original chapel, but the congregation has been around for 327 or 8 years now, and it's the nation's longest standing Native American founded Baptist church. I think it's the second oldest Native American founded church in the country. So I've been doing music there, but I just do traditional Baptist stuff. I wish we were learning some Wampanoag songs, but they're in fact, what I discovered amongst the tribal people here is that they don't have traditional songs and melodies that they have passed down, that they remember. So they make them up essentially. They're kind of it's almost as if you went to, how would I say it? I think they're going to different tribes perhaps and learning a little bit about just Native American singing styles in general, and then synthesizing those ideas into what they're producing now. I had a fascinating conversation with a fellow who's in the Black Brook Singers, which is a local Wampanoag traditional singing group. They play drums, they sing, and they were saying that for the longest time, before they started the process of relearning their own language, that they would just make up syllables, to sing along. So it's a fascinating history there, and hopefully in the future, what's going to happen is these strands of tradition are going to come together again, because this church here has been, so far as I know, it's been pretty traditional American Baptist for at least the past 100 years. But once upon a time, when the church was founded, basically all of the structures of the tribe, the tribal hierarchy, etc., basically became the church, and the church became the governing body. So going back to what you were saying about the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass, and the Rad Trad movement, as you know, there's this conception. I know Dr. Taylor Marshall talks a lot about it, that, Rome is home, and there's this prophetic thrust by some interpretations in Catholicism that, God wanted Christ to be the monarch of the world, and he came during the time of the Roman Empire. And so eventually it was destiny. It was foretold that Christ would essentially appropriate the Roman Empire, as history showed. So in the same way, when the Wampanoag converted here voluntarily, and by their own interest, they founded a church, and basically their Christianity kind of, how would I say it? I would say that either they appropriated Christianity and brought it into their own pre-existing structures, or vice versa. They allowed their Christian faith to appropriate their currently existing tribal structures, and essentially used the church meeting in the same way that they use their traditional tribal meetings. It's a very fascinating history. If you look into it, you can look up Faith and Boundaries by David J. Silverman. You can look up Thomas Mayhew, Patriarch to the Indians, and there's a few other good books about it too. It's fascinating. And by the way, Mayhew's translation of the Bible from English into Wampanoag is the primary vehicle by which the tribe is now rediscovering, relearning their language.
So as a musician, a composer, and a pastor, what role do you think music plays in religion?
Fantastic question. Well, in some ways, music is the language of spirituality. We always hear so much, whether you're Christian or not, about how difficult it is to put religion, spiritual concepts into words. If you're a full-on Zen Buddhist, then they talk a lot about the futility of that. But I'm a big, it's funny, I'm a big believer in, the idea that during the Mass, heaven and earth are meeting, in the sacred liturgy, which is a very, old school high church idea. And so you can't have heaven and earth meet without choirs of angels. And I've always loved that idea that when you're singing in church, you're singing with heaven, with heaven. So it's definitely baked into the cake of the Christian liturgical rite. And I always wanted to write a mass because I went to Longmeadow High School, and in our choir we would sing a major work every year, and those were usually masses because the great major works, multi-movement pieces, were written for church. And in fact, that's where our greatest composers come from. They were either court musicians or they were church musicians. Like Johann Sebastian Bach was an organist first and a composer second, who happened to be very prolific. He could just bang these things out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because you might be familiar with this, being familiar with the traditional Latin Mass movement. Like, modern music making in church has always been a controversy from the beginning. And there are times in the church where they said no percussion or even no instruments, just voices, just chant. But also the Bible, the Psalms are written by King David, who played the lyre,
Mm-hmm.
the modern equivalent of a guitar.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we always, I'm aware that in some ways I'm a parody, the singing pastor with his acoustic guitar, because we're also doing a lot of the old school Baptist stuff,
Yeah.
Which is kind of, what people make fun of a lot. But at the end of the day, one of the things that you're doing in church is serving people, and people come to church to sing. And that's a big part of people's spiritual lives, having a place to sing and having a place to sing about God and to God. And so, my take on it is that, you can't shut us up. If you did, the rocks and stones would cry out and sing themselves,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. Where can people go to hear your sermon, learn about your church, hear your music?
I got 3 URLs for you. The first one,
All right,
is the church is communitybaptistgayhead.church. And then you can catch my sermons either through that page, or if you go straight to SeanMcMahon.com. And then you can find all of my music at workmansong.com, which is my original music project, where I bake Christianity deep into the cake of my secular music.
all right, great. Well, thanks so much, Sean. I'll put all those links with this video. And thanks again, and stay in touch.
Pleasure speaking with you, Justin. Thank you.
Likewise.